Hello and welcome to the Careers in Sport webinar, and we are focusing on sports business. Now, Careers in Sport is an educational resource for people who want to develop and achieve their dreams in working in the sports industry. And the sports industry is so fast. There is so many professions and careers out there. And did you know over 200,000 young people aged between 14 to 18 will study a qualification in sport? And Careers in Sport can not just help you on the pitch or the court or the track, it can help you behind the scenes as well. If you're looking at your career options and thinking which one is for you, and perhaps you're thinking a career in the sports business, then you've come to the right place, because I've been joined by some leading professionals who will talk to you about their journey of working in the sports industry, but also give you some wise words of wisdom if you want to work in the sports business. Now, I'm delighted to say I've been joined by Alex Coulson, who is the Managing Director of the Sports Industry Group. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
You're most welcome. Also, I've been joined by Dr. Nicolas Scelles, who is the leader of the Global Online MSc in Sport Business, Management and Policy at Manchester Metropolitan University. Good morning, Dr. Nicolas.
Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning. Very happy
You're
to be here.
Most welcome. And finally, we have Alison Oliver, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Youth Sport Trust. Hello, Alison.
Hello, good morning, and thank you again for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you all for taking part in this webinar. Now, we're going to start right at the beginning with each of you. Please talk to me about your journey and why you chose the sports business industry. Let's start with you, Alex.
Like probably many people, certainly when I started, I sort of slightly fell into it a little bit. So I did an English and French degree at university, but basically I liked language and English, and so went in to do communications and got some work experience at a PR agency that had a sports division. And the first job they asked me to do when I turned up was to read the back pages of the newspapers and read about all the sports stories and say what was going on. So that was my first sort of insight into the industry. And I thought, if I'm being paid here to read about the sports pages, which I was doing anyway as a fan, then this is an industry I wanted to find out more about. And that was my first step into the industry.
And specifically sports business, as your career journey has progressed along, let's bring it forward to today. Why sports business?
Basically the sort of trajectory from starting off in sports PR, I basically stayed in sports PR working at different agencies for over a decade. So working on behalf of different brands, events, federations and national government bodies, other people who wanted to talk about what they were up to in sport. And I just loved it, the opportunity to always talk about a subject matter that cared to me. The people in the industry had similar sort of interest and passion as mine. And then that fast forwarded to now I run a business called Sport Industry Group, which is a B2B, so business to business organization that helps other businesses have more business within the sports sector. And so I sort of still operate in the same industry, but with a sort of slightly wider role and remit.
Nicolas, same question to you, because you're not from the UK, you're from France, and then you studied, you came over here and you've worked in Scotland as well as England. So you've had quite a career trajectory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was already a lecturer actually in France in sport management before going to Scotland 7 years ago now. So I spent 4 years and a half at the University of Stirling, and then it will be 2 years and a half at Manchester Metropolitan University. So yeah, in a way it provided me with a kind of international view on what is sport business, what is sport management, with the possibility to compare different systems and way of working in sport business. Yeah.
And Alison, for you began your career in teaching, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I really grew up being active and being involved in sport, and kind of lived for being involved in sport. And I think it's sometimes a bit of a stereotypical journey, but thought, well, what will I do? I'll go and teach physical education. And that's where I started my teacher training and started in secondary education. Really enjoyed it, but I think only as I grew up did I start to really understand that my love of sport wasn't just about the pursuit of fitness and activity. It was all the things that I had learnt and how I'd grown and developed as a human being through sport that started to interest me more, and that sort of took me more into the first sport development world, and then kind of where I sit now, which is in the sport for development or sport for good sector.
And as I mentioned, there is so many opportunities and careers out there for people who want to work in the sports business. Nicolas, let's start with you. I mean, if somebody's at school and they're thinking about working in the sports business, what different types of careers, professions are out there for them?
Well, it's I would say it's really broad in sport business, sport management, because it really, I guess at the very start, it will depend on what is the main motivation of this student. Is it more on professional sport? Is it more on retailing like Nike or Adidas? Is it more in the public sector or voluntary sector? So there are so many opportunities there, and probably the student will have an initial ID, but that may be shaped and differ at the end, because when he will enter a sport business or sport management degree, he will discover that there are so many opportunities that maybe it will change her or his mind. So it's difficult to provide an overview, because it's such a depth of opportunities that yeah, I think in the end it will depend what is the main interest of this student.
Alison, can I ask you, why do you think there is now so many more opportunities for a young person to work in the sports business industry?
I guess it's a natural evolution of sport, recreation, active leisure, that it's kind of pervaded every element of life. So again, when I kind of think back 30 odd years ago, really being a PE teacher was probably the only obvious thing to someone who was passionate about sport. But now, as we've just heard there, there's so many different sectors, you know, from the private, public and state sector, in terms of roles from local authorities into charities, into, as we've heard, retail, education. I think it's just that sport is it's a huge part of our culture as a nation. And as the world evolves and as, I guess, the economy evolves, so more people find opportunities to both make money out of sport, but also use sport for social ends and social outcomes.
And Alex, I guess for you, because you've worked in communications, and then you're working the wider, broader industry of the business of sport, you've been able to see all the different types of careers and professions out there, haven't you?
I have, and there's certainly, there's careers now that didn't exist when I was coming into the industry as well. I think what's really important for anyone considering a career in sport is thinking beyond what's just happening on the pitch and the things they see maybe on sort of TV or reported in the media, because it's the whole wider ecosystem. And over the last 20 years, the professionalization of sport, the commercialization of sport leads to a series of different opportunities. And so there's a whole ecosystem that exists around sport that is really going to probably provide the vast majority of opportunities to working in the industry. If everyone just thinks of wanting to work for their favorite football team or work for Nike or Adidas, there's only a few people that get to do that, but there's a lot more people that get to work and have really exciting and interesting jobs in that wider ecosystem. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about sort of what those opportunities are.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is actually, that's a lovely segue into the next section, actually. So let's stick with you, actually, Alex, on that particular topic. So someone, a young person, has studied some sort of degree in the sports, looking at sports business. What do you think the next step should be for that person once they've graduated?
Well, hopefully during their degree, they'll start to get a feel for the areas that interest them most. Nicola and Ali have sort of touched on a few of those, whether it's sport for good or whether it's more retail or areas that might interest them. But I think it's important to think about the sort of disciplines within sport. So are you quite a commercial person? Do you like the idea of sales? Do you like helping people and more interested in sport for good? And so looking at what different disciplines are important to you would definitely help. I think another key thing I would consider is think about where the actual opportunities lie. A lot of people want to work in sport, so it can be quite competitive. So you need to be focused. It's hard to dissect the sport industry. It used to be easier, but so many organizations do so many different things. There's a huge amount of what you call convergence. There is no correct way to split up the industry, but a sort of simple way that I would do it, and then feel free to sort of disagree and do it in your own way, but you can split it into maybe 6 different areas, which would be agencies, brands, media, rights holders, suppliers, and also sort of not-for-profit. And within each of those, there's different sort of subsections. But if you start mapping out where different businesses lie in the industry and what roles within those businesses and those sort of different channels and buckets, if you like, that will help you start creating a map in your mind, or even a physical map, doodle on a piece of paper or put it on your computer somewhere. That will help you start to navigate your way through. So rather than feel like it's this overwhelming amount of information, you can start to sort of think, well, actually, I'm really interested in working for a brand and I want to do a digital marketing role within that brand. So you can start to sort of break down the layers and find your way through.
It's a really good point, Alison, that Alex has made, hasn't he, about splitting it into all the different areas and researching, I guess, all the different areas. Because to somebody looking at the sports industry, they might feel slightly overwhelmed about there are so many opportunities out there for them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's enormous, the sector, and really what Alex is just saying, I think, is absolutely spot on. Is really any professional career you can think of, you can probably do it in the context of sport now. So it is about really interrogating yourself and thinking, what am I really passionate about? So yes, I'm passionate about sport. I'd like to work in that sector, but what is it that motivates and drives me? And as I kind of reflected in my first answer, sometimes it takes us a little while to work out what it is that motivates us. And until you start in a role or start to work for an organisation or in a sector, you don't really know that. And I think, a piece of advice I would certainly give to people is be aware of the breadth. Pick where you'd like to start, but don't think where you start needs to mean where you'll end up. I started as a teacher working for the government in the public sector role, and I now work in the charity sector. Doing sport for good, and that's sort of been a natural evolution as I've understood more about myself and learned more about the sector.
Could I just
Nicolas, I guess,
jump in?
Go on.
So I was just going to build on Ali's point, because just to say that, where you start really doesn't have to be where you end up. But I do think it's really important when you do meet someone or try to get your foot in the door, that you're quite focused about what you want to do. So if I just say, for example, you want to work in digital marketing, then when you meet someone and you're talking to people, you're quite clear that that's where you want to go. And they will probably, because it's quite a friendly industry, will try and help you do that. If you don't get in there and realize that actually you're much more excited running events and you want to leave the digital marketing and go to physical events, you can transition within. But if when you first meet someone in the industry and you're trying to sort of fight your way in, if you just say, I'm interested in working in the sport industry, you're not giving them enough to work with to help you. You need to give them some sort of idea of where they might be able to lead you to or connect you to somebody else. But if you're too general in your first approach, it's very hard for other people to help you. And there are plenty of people out there that hopefully will try and help you if they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Nicolas, to you, I mean, it's the same question. Do you have the students that you are teaching at the moment or you're working with at the moment, do you get a sense of what they want to do once they've graduated?
Yeah, so first of all, I fully agree with both other participants. The fact that you need to have a focus, but to stay open to maybe other opportunities. So it's important to have a focus because it will help you engage in your studies and know where you want to go. After, you need to be aware that you will not automatically end where you want to go, and maybe you will even identify some other opportunities that in the end you will even find more interesting. So I think both aspects have a focus, but staying open to other opportunities is really important. Coming to my students, I often ask them, do you have an idea of what you want to do at the end? It's not always the case, or they have not always an exact idea in the first years, but gradually we can see that they have a better and better idea. We try to have guest lecturers or connection with sport organizations, and I think in a way it helps them see different possibilities, different roles, the kind of skills they need, and it shapes what they want. And towards the end of their studies, when they are close to be graduated, in general, they have a clear idea of where they want to go, and sometimes they have even already done an internship because they have this option to do a placement or been in touch with sport organizations. Sometimes because in their research project, they have engaged with sport organizations, and often it helps them find a job at the end.
Just something that just from my personal point of view, is a question I'd like to ask all three of you actually. How important is it to have a degree for sports business? Is it an absolute requirement for someone to have that on their CV? Let's start with you, Alex.
Well, don't want to upset Nicola, but I'm going to say no. That is, it's not an absolute requirement. Obviously, it will give you many advantages, but I'm a huge advocate for just sort of industry experience as well. I actually think what's probably, if you're looking for a sort of more vocational, direct intro into sport, yes, a sport business degree is very helpful, but also so would be a marketing degree, or so would be a data management degree, or so would be a event production degree, so would be a media degree. Like sort of Ali touched on, there's any sorts of sport. This sports sector covers so many different disciplines. So it's not essential to have a sport business degree, and frankly, it's not essential to have a degree at all. I think it's obviously helpful, but there's many ways in, and it's all about kind of demonstrating your value to a potential employer and thinking about maybe what you have that a potential employer doesn't have. So if you've got the advantage of youth, then you may be more of a sort of digital native, a better understanding and practitioner of social media, etc., etc. So that can be a real strength, and that's not always something that can be easily taught.
And Nicolas, give the case for someone if they wanted to do a degree.
Yeah, so of course, in a way, I agree that it's not an absolute prerequisite, but it clearly helps. And some sport organizations really value sport business or sport management degrees because their manager had such a degree and knows the benefits of having that. What we offer compared to, for example, a marketing degree that would not be specific to sport is an understanding of the specificities of sport. And clearly there are some peculiarity, especially at a professional sport level. It can be simply defined in other sectors. You are quite happy when you are alone on the market. If you are alone in professional sport, you cannot play basically. And this quite obvious claim generate quite a lot of specificities that people need to be aware when they work in. Clearly, having a sport management degree helps you understand those peculiarities, to adapt to changes, and can clearly provide a competitive advantage. So I think it's a key point, and again, some sport organizations really value that. I would not say they say it's a prerequisite, but they may favor someone with a sport business or sport management degree over someone without such a degree.
Alison, anything you'd like to add to that discussion?
No, I think both points are very clear and really relevant, that there are some careers that a sport management degree, sport business degree is going to be absolutely right and equip you and demonstrate your commitment to that subject area really clearly. But there's a whole range of roles out there that isn't essential. And I always think when I'm recruiting, I do look at academic and educational qualifications. They tell me something about the individual themselves, their application to work, perhaps how long they've been passionate and interested in this area. But I'm equally interested in their experiences and what they've done to equip themselves with a greater understanding and insight of the sector or the type of work that they're applying to do. And then you absolutely have to take what's in front of your face. And throughout my entire career, and particularly more so when I've been in leadership recruiting, the individual's personal skills, interpersonal skills, their humanity, their values, their beliefs, all of those things, I think are increasingly important actually in an ever digital world. We need those sorts of skills, but to complement them, we need all of those human and interpersonal skills. So I think it's those three layers.
Alison, you just done me a massive favour there, because that's nicely segued into my next discussion point, which is about key skills, because it's a great point to make that it's not just about what you see on a piece of paper, but it's also those skills that you need for these type of jobs. So Alex, let me come to you. In terms of sports business, what are the key skills do you think that a young person will need to work in that part of the industry?
I mean, sport business is such a sort of broad area that it's difficult to sort of answer that fully. One sort of starting point, a piece of advice I think about is, and it's not easy, but it's to try to spot trends or growing trends within the industry, and maybe where the sport industry is actually trying to catch up. So then when you get out into the market, into the job market in sport, you'll maybe the sort of in-demand candidate, as it were. So, there's a lot of, and they're very much needed, but there are a lot of sort of general sports marketing, sport industry people around who have lots of valuable experience over the years. So it's hard necessarily to come into the market and compete with them. But if you look at trends, and these are very obvious and been around for a while, but how sports organizations are using data, how they're using performance or digital marketing is a real area. Environmental sustainability, climate change is the biggest issue facing the whole planet. Sport has a lot to do, both in terms of being used as a platform to educate the wider society about it, but also to get its own house in order. So, if you are sort of, make example, a sustainable sport specialist, you'll be in high demand in the industry right now, and that's only going to increase. So I guess it's try to sort of absorb what's going on in the industry, and there's lots of ways to do that, and then sort of think, where are the opportunities, or where are the new markets? Do you speak Chinese? Can you help bridge the gap with the Chinese sports market, etc., etc.? Those are the kind of key skills that will make you stand out as a candidate in the job market, I would say.
That's a great point about looking at trends around the world, particularly from, that example you gave about the Chinese market, because it's huge, particularly in football. So that's a fantastic point. Nicolas, for you, do you skills that maybe if you're looking to go into policy, for example, do you need analytical skills, communication, good writing skills? What do you think?
Yeah, you definitely need some good communication and writing skills, whatever the sector, I would say. You need to have a range of understanding of different aspects of sport management or sport policy or sport business. So you need to have a kind of understanding of sport policy, sport marketing. In the online MSc, for example, I lead. We have also business analytics, because we think it's more and more important. We try to have some content around social media. We even evoke a bit esports, which is quite currently relevant in the current context. So we try, and I think it's quite linked to what has just been evoked, the fact that in a way, you need to understand the trends. You need to almost be able to anticipate what could happen in the market in the next 5-10 years. And for this, you definitely need to, as mentioned, absorb, read a lot, be interested in the news, in the trends. And depending on whether you are open to an international career, I think the Chinese case is definitely valid, and be open to what happens in the international context of sport. So I agree, I definitely agree with what has been mentioned.
And Alison, your point about those interpersonal skills as well, what we call soft skills. So being flexible, adaptable, being able to hold a conversation over the phone, all those kinds of things are really, really important nowadays, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate the fact they're called the soft skills, actually, because I think they're as
essential
as anything else. But I know why you use the term, because it does tend to be used. But yes, I mean, Nicolas just said about communication skills and writing skills will be essential whatever the role. I can't tell you how frustrating it is as an employer to have work come past you or through you which is badly written, or to engage with staff who are unable to communicate clearly what they are trying to express. So I think they're absolutely fundamental. But increasingly in the world today, and particularly in sport business, I think the really soft skills, if we're going to use that term, are things like empathy and compassion. Our ability to put ourselves in the shoes of other people, whether they're customers or whether, in my case with a charity, they're our beneficiaries, being really able to understand what's needed, where people's feelings, emotions are. We're just coming out of, hopefully coming out of this pandemic, and both the things that Alex and Nicolas both said about the trends, there are a whole new set of trends emerging, but also we've got huge divisions in society. And whether you are trying to make money out of sport or whether you are trying to do social good out of sport, you need to understand those people that you're working with. So interpersonal skills for me would be an absolute number one when I'm recruiting. But that's kind of given the world in which I work, where working with people is essential. Clearly, if you're working in a role where you work on your own, perhaps a very creative role where you're required to come up with innovative ideas and push them onto others in a different role who take them forward to people, that might be slightly different. But even then, as an employer, you're looking for someone that can be part of a team, work as a team, and be a follower as well as a leader.
And finally, to all three of you, really, and I'll come to you first, Nicolas, on this one. Extracurricular activities. We know that, students and graduates, they do like a social life, of course, and rightly so. But what is the extracurricular activities a student should be looking at if they're considering a career in the sports business, Nicolas?
Yeah, so they can look at voluntary activity in sport organization to try to help for planning events, try to take some responsibilities as voluntary activity. At the university, of course, they can do, for example, we have a sports section, so not only the studies themselves, but the practice. And of course, they can also be involved and facilitate the organization. So they can have this kind of role that are definitely relevant to provide an experience in the sport environment. After, of course, it depends on each individual objective and time they can dedicate for that, because we know that some students also need to work. But definitely, if they have the time to do it, they need to look at opportunities for volunteering, or even better if they can have a kind of part-time job in sport organization. But definitely look at any opportunities that are relevant to the job they would like to reach at the end of their studies.
Alison, same question to you. Extracurricular activities or things they should be doing outside of their qualification to enhance their job opportunities?
I think first of all is just do something, absolutely do something with your time, and particularly do something that, as Nicolas has said, equips you with those skills we've just talked about. I mean, I was the treasurer of the athletic union at university, had no real interest in finance, wasn't particularly financially minded, but I knew understanding figures and managing budgets was going to be important, whatever career or role I stepped into. So I think thinking about both your passions, but also potentially thinking about the things that perhaps don't interest you as much, or that you might lack through your studies. It might be not something you're getting through your studies, but a complementary sphere of skills that might be of interest. So yes, do something productive, and particularly if you're passionate about sport, I think the temptation is always to go and only play sport. And I'd never be one to say don't keep moving, don't keep active, but perhaps don't think every night about being active. Perhaps sometimes being on the sidelines or being back of house, taking on a more administrative role, or developing the website for the club, or whatever it happens to be, is another way of just, again, equipping yourself with a broad set of tools in your toolbox.
And Alex, for you, I guess coming back to your point about trends and keeping an eye on things, that's also, reading, watching, listening to podcasts, all those kinds of things. So you are keeping on top of trends. Because I know in my industry, I need to be watching matches, I need to be reading a lot, listening to podcasts. That's all quite part and parcel of working in the sports industry, isn't it?
It is, and there's a huge amount of free resources. I mean, the sport industry group that I run, we put out a free newsletter. There's lots of other people that do similar newsletters and free podcasts. There's a huge amount of resource that young people and students coming into the sector can get. And I do strongly recommend you make the most of that, and following people on social media and so forth. Obviously, that's harder to maybe put down on your CV. And you can talk about it if you get to the point of an interview, and you can reference it in a CV, but it's not a sort of so it's not so tangible to demonstrate. So I agree with just what the other guys said as well in terms of volunteering at things, and also Alice makes a very good point about finding things that maybe you aren't covering elsewhere in your education. So her example of being a treasurer of her sports team, because maybe that wasn't represented in other things you're doing, is really important. And I guess I'd also reiterate, it's still surprising how many people come from recruitment and for a job and say, I really love sport. And that's great, but the fact that you love sport or the fact that you're good at sport doesn't mean that you're good at writing or good at doing research or good at doing analytics or good at doing sales. And so it's great to have that interest and that passion, and playing team sport teaches you, and playing sport teaches you values and things about your life, but you need to sort of look beyond that as well, and sort of that almost have that as a bit of a given if that's your interest, but then what are those additional things you can demonstrate?
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today on this topic about sports business. I've learned a whole load of stuff. And it's, for me, I always think of sports business as data and numbers, but it's not. It's so vast, it's so big, and Alison made a fantastic point. 10 years ago, the opportunities that are now available today weren't available back then, and it will continue to grow because sport is a big, big part of our lives. So I'd like to extend a warm thank you to my guest today, to Alex Coulson at the Sports Industry Group, Dr. Nicolas Scelles at Manchester Metropolitan University, and Alison Oliver at the Youth Sport Trust. Thank you for joining me on this panel. And thanks for watching Careers in Sport webinar. Of course, this one, you'll be able to find lots of different webinars that we're going to be covering over the next few weeks or so on lots of topics that hopefully that will help you decide where you want to take your career. And for further information, do go to the website at careers-sport.co.uk, and you can also find us on social media. And also, thinking of social media, Alex, if people wanted to find you, where can they do that?
Twitter's probably best, Alex_Coulson.
Brilliant. Thank you. Alison, for you?
Yeah, Twitter again. It's Ali, A-L-I, Oliver, and then capitals Y-S-T.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Dr. Nicolas, where can we find you on social media?
I have a Twitter account, so it's Scenic82, so SCENIC 82.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar for Careers in Sport.